Hello, everybody. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces. So I'm going to tell you a little bit that you might already know, for those of you who already know me. So my name is Victoria Villasenor. I am originally from California, and I live in Nottingham now. And I run with my wife Global Wordsmiths, which is a writing consultancy working with aspiring authors who are looking to get editing and courses. And we are also a CIC, so we work with community projects and marginalized communities, helping them get their words out into the world, which is fabulous. And we also work with schools, helping children develop their love for reading and writing. So we do lots of stuff. I'm also an author. I write under the name Bray Willows, and I'm currently working on my 9th novel. And I am contracted for the next one as well, which is very exciting. And I am an editor. I've been a development editor for a publishing house in New York for the last 15 years. So lots of word things. I love word things and stories and how they connect us, which is what I wanted to talk about today. So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this, and when Tom and Sophie kind of put out the words that they were looking for something, was because I think the world of being a writer is quite isolating at times. You know, we sit in our box and we write, and by virtue of what we do, it can be really solitary. When you add a pandemic onto that, where we're kind of forced into our little boxes and we can't even go to coffee shops to hang out together and write, it becomes even more so. So I was really aware of this the other day when I was talking to a friend about coming out of lockdown and that kind of anxiety that's coming out for people who are going back out into the world. But then I was also thinking about all the stories that have come out of lockdown, all the family dramas and the interesting divide between people who've been really creative, who have used lockdown to just pound out the words and kind of immerse themselves, and then others who just feel completely stifled and can't reach their creativity at all. So as we're kind of in this transition phase, I was thinking about how writing connects us and how stories connect us, and how people are using writing and stories to connect to each other. So I wanted to start with a quote. "Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity." And I thought that's just a beautiful quote, and I'm going to butcher this and I apologize, but it's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Sorry. But I just thought it was beautiful. And I think it's so true. And some of those stories that we're hearing, particularly via social media, can both kind of raise and lower what you're thinking about, and they can raise and lower your creativity, and they can make you think about other things that maybe you wouldn't have thought about before. So in the beginning, we make connections via the stories we're told, right? We get bedtime stories. We hear fairy tales. We get stories of our family who tell us who we are and where we've come from. These stories of connection through generations that give us some sense of who we are via who we've been and who our family has been. And these connections also provide empathy, right? Your fairy tales, your bedtime stories, they give you a sense of empathy toward other people. They provide a sense of understanding about the world. Obviously, they're entertainment. They're good escapism. You know, we build connections that way too, talking about books we liked and things that we found entertaining in them. They give us a sense of catharsis sometimes. You can read a book and think, I feel better now. It just brings something out in you. And of course, it allows for transformation. Writing and stories allow us to change. They allow us to think differently. They allow us to connect differently. When we're open to connecting with other people, we can transform, and we can help them transform and hopefully grow and become different. And I think that's amazing. I think that's really a beautiful part of connecting via words. These just little letters that we string together can transform who we are and can transform our relationships with people. And the way that we share that information can transform us. And isn't that spectacular when you really break it down and think about it? So, do you remember, and I'm actually asking you, do you remember the first book that really grabbed you, even as a child or as an adult? Do you remember the very first book that you could not put down, that took you into another world? The book that you kind of stayed awake, reading with a flashlight under the covers so that your parents didn't tell you to go to bed. Do you remember what that book was? I'd love for you to put it in the chat if you do. I think people aren't always aware of that, but thinking back to that book can really remind you of the story that connected you to what you like to read and to the world that you felt comfortable in. So I'm going to give you like 5 seconds to think about that and throw it in the chat box, right? Okay, 5 seconds. I've got one. The Magic Faraway Tree. What a lovely idea. And that's really going back, isn't it? And Eden Blyton, I mean, that's everybody's favorite, right? And Goosebumps, I mean, these are stories that connected you, right? As kids, they just connected you to the world. And The Weird Story of Brissingham Men. I haven't heard of that one, Tracy. That's interesting. I'll have to look that up. Mrs. Pepperpot. Oh, thank you. I love Mrs. Pepperpot. But this is connection, right? These very first books that grab us. I think my very first one was The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. And it opened me up into the world of fantasy and science fiction. And I never looked back. And that's what I write now. This whole kind of childhood journey. And my connections through those books have continued on into my adulthood. So I now connect with other science fiction writers and other fantasy writers and readers who love that type of work. And we develop this energetic kind of kinestology, this passion for story and for words. And I think that is amazing. So I've got another quote for you. Story, as it turns out, was crucial to our evolution, more so than opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs let us hang on. Stories told us what to hang on to. And that's by Lisa Cron. I think that's another fabulous quote. Story connects us in deeper ways than sometimes we're even aware. The stories of people who go through obstacles, who surmount obstacles, right? This is the format of story, right? A story without obstacles is a Murakami novel. It's dreaming and sleeping and dreaming and sleeping. But it's also how we know that we are moving forward, that we can do it too. And I think we see this particularly with LGBTQ books that are now readily available kind of all over the Western world, where people can see themselves as the main characters in these books. They don't have to die. They don't have to be sent away to camps. They don't, none of this has to happen anymore. They just get a happy ever after and get to surmount whatever obstacles are in front of them. So again, you're making connections with communities who haven't been able to see themselves on the page before, which is exceptional. I just finished editing, well, it's actually just come out, a BIPOC anthology for writers from the, now I can't, I'm on so much allergy medication, but for marginalized writers. And the stories that came in for that were amazing. They were different and vibrant and, you know, culturally really clear. And it was such an honor to be able to edit that anthology and to have a piece in it as well. Obviously, with my name being Villasenor, I'm Spanish. So we develop these connections sometimes without even knowing it. We attach ourselves to novels, we attach ourselves to stories, and then we pass them on. We share those stories, just like you've now shared your first kind of real intense book with us. Now we can go look those up and we can share that experience with you. And then we develop a connection. And I can send you a message and say, you know, Nikki, I loved this bit in Mrs. Pepperpot, right? And then we have a connection. Part of it is remembering to share the connections. As we do this with lockdown and not being sure about coming out of lockdown and all this stuff, it's really easy to continue to isolate and to not seek those connections. So we have to remember to do so. We have to remember to reach out. And so, you know, when I send you a message and say, I've just started the Sophie series, right? That's an active connection. Connecting with you via story, via words, and then our shared passion on that. So over time, we come home and we tell the story of our day, right? We have less time to read, pre-pandemic, unless you have kids, in which case, if you're home, you probably have no time at all. But you come home and you tell the story of your day, right? Somebody says, what did you do today? And you say, oh, you know, it was just a normal day. Maybe nothing happened. Or you say, you know, so-and-so was just bugging me all day and I had this happen and I had that happen. It's a story. And we forget that they are stories. We're just sharing an experience. But within that experience is a story. And by sharing it, we get a connection because the other person can respond. And then we develop that story via our connections. And it continues on. On social media, which is such a massive part of our lives now. I mean, I can't fathom what life was like before social media. And I had a lot of life before social media. And yet it's become such an integral part of life. It's become, you know, something you doom scroll, looking at all the, particularly, you know, the US election that just passed. You were doom scrolling to see what horrible things were happening, and you almost couldn't stop yourself. But I think one of the beautiful things that has come out of that is connection, particularly for writers. I think writing groups, online writing groups, have multiplied because you can't meet in person. And sometimes there's a little less intimidation in doing something by screens and actually walking into a room with a bunch of people you don't know. Book groups, loads of book groups have popped up. The ability to connect via story through social media has become really powerful. And that is one of the beautiful things. So if you can move beyond the doom scrolling and the mindless scrolling and the Candy Crush, then, you know, you can really find a world that is immersive, where you can share your passion, where you can connect through your stories, the stories of your day, if that's what it is. Because sometimes these groups grow and they become friendships. They become more than just a place to talk about whether or not you should use dangling modifiers. you know, I don't know what one of those is, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. So think about what you do during your day, because what we see, and this comes back to connecting actively, what you see on Facebook is snippets of stories. You see on Twitter, it's a moment of nothing. It's a momentary thought that somebody had. But sometimes within that momentary thought, there's something much bigger happening in the background. There's a story going on. And if you actively pursue that connection as a writer, you can find so much more than just that snippet. So for instance, somebody posts, some people drive me crazy. I wish I was somewhere else. Vague booking, right? I mean, that means, you know, there's not much to that. But you can sense the emotion behind it, right? There's a frustration, there's a depth behind it. And a lot of people will click like and keep going. But as a writer, if you then send that person a message and say, hey, I saw your post. Do you want to talk about what's going on? You're connecting with that person. You're connecting on a different level. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that with total strangers, because they're going to think you're weird. They're not going to respond. But if it's somebody you know, send a message, say something, and develop that connection. Bringing it back to writing comes right back to what I was saying about empathy and knowing who you are. Developing empathy will always make you a better writer. Always. The one thing I'm always harping on authors about is emotion. I'm always saying, and how did the character feel about that? And what did that make them feel, right? Because if I tell you, well, I went in, I tripped over something, I pulled the milk out and it was sour, that's a lot of detail, but it's not the emotion. And emotion is what grabs you. Emotion is what grabs a reader. Developing connections using empathy will make you a better writer. But as writers, we tend to be very solitary creatures, and reaching out isn't always the easiest thing to do. Now, I send messages. I am one of these weird people who will send a message and just say, hey, checking in, how are you? And most of the time I don't get a response. And that's okay. Sometimes I do. But just knowing that somebody's out there that wants to know how you are can make a big difference. And it keeps those connections solid. The stories we tell ourselves factor in here too. And the way that we tell our stories, right? We're all familiar with the idea of self-talk. And, you know, if you're constantly calling yourself names, if you're telling yourself you're stupid or ugly or any of that, that's your story. That's the story you're telling yourself. And it's the story that will filter in. It's the story that you will believe and continue to believe. If you said that to somebody else, if you called them fat or ugly or lazy, you would never do it, right? I mean, that's a horrific thing to say to somebody else. So why do you say it to yourself? It's a story. And when it comes to social media and connection, stories matter. So how you share your story and how you share the story of yourself matters, because you will internalize it. So share the story of yourself that you want to share. Share the story that you want to internalize, and make that connection with the people who will help you build that story and help you create that story, so that you're raised and you can then develop your creativity in a more positive space. Because it's all about perception and emotion. And perception and emotion as a writer are pivotal. How a writer perceives things will drift into their manuscripts and help you develop your characters and what they perceive and the stories they tell themselves about themselves and about other people. It's very, very cyclical, very circular in nature. Stories transfer. They connect us. They connect us to our characters, to our readers, to each other. It's very much a connected community. As writers, it's really easy to forget that your words matter. And they matter in ways that you can't fathom. And I think this is probably one of the most magical things about being a writer and putting your words out in the world. You're not just writing, you are creating connections. When you take your words and you throw them out into the world, you start the connecting process. You develop these amazing symbiotic relationships with readers that you may never even be aware of. But your stories connect. Remember that. It's really important. Because when you remember that you are creating connections, that you're not just throwing, black squiggly lines on white paper, when you know that they are going to affect people, it'll help you connect to your writing. It'll help you feel deeper what you're putting out in the world, because it does matter. When I was at Manchester Pride several years ago, Pride, books and Pride don't often go together. It's not, you don't see people lugging books around at Manchester Pride. But the amount of people who stop by the booth is really, really incredible. And a couple years ago, somebody sent me a letter to say, I want to come by the booth, but I'm afraid. And she sent this whole long email about how she had been passing by the booth and walking back, and she really wanted to come over and talk to us. But she was so afraid to do it. And once she did, and she picked up the books, and she saw characters like her, and all these different books, and she's a voracious reader, she was home. And we've since become friends. Those are connections. And she was telling me how important it was for her to suddenly be involved in this community and to have this world opened up to her. Writers give people connection. They give people hope. They give people a way to see themselves. They give them a way to move beyond where they are. So your words aren't just words on a page. And if the book isn't selling well, if you're having trouble marketing it, all this stuff that goes on behind the scenes when you're a writer, if you've touched one person and made one connection, that is amazing. So another quote for you. Whether you know it or not, your desire to write comes from the urge to not just be creative. It's a need, one every human being on earth has, to help others. A well-told story is a gift to the reader, listener, and viewer because it teaches them how to confront their own discomforts. I think that's another beautiful one. Writing, you may think that you're just writing something simple. I write fantasy and sci-fi. It's fun. It's often silly and sarcastic. But I try to put in elements that matter, that speak to people. And I've had several people email me with photos of their tattoos from my books because my books spoke to them in such a way that they had a connection to them. They really mattered. And how spectacular is that? That a story that came out of my head has reached people like that. And I think as writers, that's what you have to remember. You are creating connections. Your words matter. And even if nobody sends you that message to say so, it will happen. So you've told me what the very first book was that grabbed you. What is the most recent book that grabbed you? The thing you've read most recently that you can't wait to tell people about. Pop that in the chat box too. Jenny Slate, Little Weirds. That sounds like one I'd like. Eleanor Oliphant. That series has done well, hasn't it? Anne McMahon. Oh, the Jericho series. All right. Fantastic. Matilda Windsor's Coming Home. Anne Goodwin. Okay. And 7 Nights at the Flamingo Hotel. Excellent. See, I mean, I'm looking at these and now I need to go look them all up, which is amazing. I know some of them. My Autobiography of Carson McCullers. Excellent. I don't know who Carson McCullers or Jen Shapland is, but now I'm going to find out. So when you look at these books, both the very first one that grabbed you and the one that grabbed you most recently, I want you to think about why. Why did it grab you? What is it that makes you want to tell people about this series? Because I think often we can read a book and set it down and think, wow, that was really good, but not analyze why. And as writers, I think it's really important to do that. Because once you've figured that out, what it is that grabbed you, can you then utilize that as a writer? Not the same words or whatever, but the emotion behind it, the way that it's written. Can you entangle that with your own writing somehow? Because you know it works, right? You know that reaches people, that connects with people. So how can you do it? So take these books that you've just put down and really think about that, how they connected with you, what they made you think, how they made you feel. Take a passage that you really love. One of mine is The Book Thief. I absolutely adore The Book Thief. I think it's an amazing book with some stunningly beautiful sentences. And it's one that I can read a passage and put the book down and just think about that passage. So do that with this book that you've just mentioned. Find a passage you love and figure out why it connects to you, what it is that makes you feel. And then as a writer, use that and pass that connection on. I'd like to know too, and I want you to think about this, what connections you've made via your writing. Because it's not just the person who emails to say, you know, I loved this book, or, you know, look at my tattoo on my thigh. It's also what connections you've made, whether you've published yet or not. There's an author that I currently work with at the publishing house, and I met her at States of Independence for about 4 years in a row. She would come to the table and we'd have a good laugh, and she'd say, I'm still writing that book. One day I'll get around to it. And I say, you know, keep going. You can do it. And when you're ready, just give me a shout. 4 years this went on. And she finally came to me at the Nottingham Book Festival and pitched the book. She's now working on her third with the publishing house. Connection. It's the energy you put into writing. It's the connections you make that keep you going as well, that don't allow you to just give up, to just bottom drawer your novel and think, I'll just start mowing lawns for a living because it's easier, right? Writing is difficult. And because it can be solitary, you have to actively make these connections. So I've got tips for you. Woo, yay for tips. And I'm actually going to pop the file in the chat box for you so that you have the tips as well. So bear with me for 1 second while I do that. maybe. There we go. Okay, there's one. So forging connections right now as writers. Write a letter. How long has it been since you wrote a real letter on paper without a computer? I mean, we don't do it anymore, right? We send off a quick email. Write an actual letter, because there's been proven science that writing by hand uses a different part of the brain than writing with a computer. So try it. Write somebody an actual letter and be true to your own voice. The social media thing has created a monster of not being who you are and being afraid to say things the way you would. Now, I am full of imposter syndrome. I'm just a big mass of imposter syndrome. But I think learning how to be really authentic and just say things and send emails to people to say, I was thinking about you today, how are you? Do it. Who cares if it seems a bit weird or they don't respond? Be who you are. Ask open-ended questions. And as a writer, I think this is really important, especially with regard to building connection. Instead of yes or no questions, right? Did you have a good day? Yes. Right? Tell me how you feel today. That's an open-ended question. That requires more than a yes or no. Use those open-ended questions as a writer to build connections. If you've found somebody on a list that you're on and you think they're interesting and they've said interesting things, ask them an open-ended question and see what you get. Be silly, send each other one and say, open-ended question. Why did you choose to paint your wall that color? What's your favorite book on the bookshelf behind you? Right? Ask open-ended questions. Develop connections via the bigger questions. Because the things that you learn can end up in your writing. They can end up with empathetic kind of nuance that allow you to put deeper meaning into your books. Bring up things in common. Bring up things that you don't have in common. Start a friendly debate. One that won't devolve into weird metaphorical name calling. And write with other people. And I think this is kind of the biggest one. The Nottingham Writers Studio was created for writers. It was to bring writers together, to have a place to develop creativity all together. I started with the Nottingham Writers Studio a long time ago. When I first moved to Nottingham in 2008. And it was in this tiny little office on Stony Street. But the connections made were amazing. To be able to sit in a room with writers who had been published, with writers who were still working on what they were doing, with writers who were searching for things. It was an amazing experience. So use places like the studio. Find groups where you can just hang out together and write and give each other feedback and workshops. Writing groups, even online, are really useful connections. They're a great way to get feedback. Writing groups online, you have to take a little more salt, I think, because not everybody knows what they're talking about, but everybody will have an opinion. So writing groups online can be a little hit or miss, but they are a good way to develop connections, and you might find a group that you really gel with. Writing retreats. I'm a huge believer in writing retreats, as at least two of you know, because you've been on them with me. Getting away for a week and taking an entire week to devote just to your writing is such a gift. And it develops connections that you probably didn't plan on even making. It gives you a safe space to learn. It gives you a place to be quiet and just be with yourself and write. Now, obviously, going away to other countries right now isn't really an option, but there are plenty going on here in the UK. We're doing two. We're doing kind of another beginning, just getting started retreat, and we're doing another one for the kind of more advanced ones who have already done the others. And they're both here in this country, Wales, this island. But writing retreats can give you connections that last for life. And then learn from other people's connections and stories. So I know that at least 3 of you have really interesting journeys to where you're at right now, that you've taken interesting courses, that you've got developing things, that you've been writing for a long time. Talk to people, talk to other writers, and ask questions. There are very few writers who won't share with you what they've done or what their knowledge is or how they found their way through the labyrinth. Actively connect. It's very easy to be passive. It's so easy to be passive now. So reach out. Talk to each other, ask questions. Get back in touch with people. People that you've lost touch with, shoot them an email. Write them a real letter. But get back in touch. I think one of the things as a writer that's really, really useful is redeveloping connections, because so many stories are about exactly that. Redeveloping connections, getting back to people, learning who you are and where you've come from. So come back to that and see how people are doing. You think about the amount of, say, movies that are out there about coming home, right? Or meeting that old high school flame and look what they look like now, right? What are they doing now? Facebook makes this a lot easier. I'm still in touch with people I never ever would have been in touch with had it not been for that. And I see where they are, and they end up in novels, you know, and they may not know it and they'll never read them. So that's okay. But use those connections as story fodder as well. And think about how you feel when you see them and how you felt when you knew them before, because empathy and emotion bleed into your work. And then the last one is tell your own story. And this is really, really powerful. You have to be in the right mindset to do it. But telling your own story authentically and honestly can be really powerful. So whether you do that via a blog or sharing with somebody that maybe you've known for a while, but you've never really gone below the surface, share, develop that connection. Write down your beginnings. Where did you start in life? How does that compare to where you are now? Or write about a pivotal moment in your life and really delve into the connections and the emotions you had at that time. And really dig deep. And then if you can share that with another writer, and maybe they can do the same, it can show you the depth of emotion that maybe you're not putting in, say, a fiction novel, because you haven't dug deep enough to develop that connection between the emotions and the characters. So, a last quote: "You may tell a tale that takes up residence in someone's soul, becomes their blood and self and purpose. That tale will move them and drive them, and who knows that they might do because of it, because of your words. That is your role and your gift. That's Erin Morgenstern. And I think that's what I want to leave you with, is what connections are you making? And remember that your words matter. They really, really do. And once you've put them out in the world, once you've shared that bit of your soul that you've kind of chunked out and tossed into the world, you are already creating connections. So reach out to each other, keep writing, and be active in developing your connections. So with that, if you want to throw anything in the Q&A or in the chat box or anything like that, please do. Oh, don't be that silent class that doesn't say anything. Sarah Sutton, you always have something to say. Come on.
Oh, that's on the spot.
Yeah, I picked on you.
For me, it's like, at the moment, it's like you say, it's just totally, we're all in little boxes, and I'm finding it, I have the ideas, but it's just getting down to put the words on the paper. So I've got loads of notebooks knocking around, and it's like, what's the new normal now that we're in the pandemic, for sort of getting a routine going? Because normally you'd go on a course and be fired up, but it's really strange at the moment. And that's
yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think a lot of people are struggling about that, Sarah. And that's why I'm advising being active, because we were forced into a kind of passivity for the last year and a half. And I think now we have to push ourselves out of that comfort zone. And so I would say, like, are you part of a writing group?
No, not at the moment. No, I
Okay.
think that's where because that's the rocket up your backside to get something for the next crit group or something. So yeah, that's probably the next. Yeah.
I think that's a good idea, because it's that connections. And when you develop those connections with a writing group of some kind, it gives you a sense of accountability. Yeah. Because like you say, you have to have something ready.
Yeah.
And so it kind of pushes you into your creative zone. So I think I would suggest that. And like I say, courses aren't readily available right now so much, but there are writing retreats. So, maybe get yourself away for a week and really immerse yourself again.
Yeah, that would do it. Yeah, I'll try. Thank you. In Wales.
Hey, send me an email. We've got room.
Oh, good.
Sherry.
I've just got to unmute my video. Unmute my video. That was a test. I wanted to say that like Sarah, it's you're stuck in a box, and at times I've been banging my head against the wall. I'm lucky in that I did one of Victoria's retreats. I've done a few. I'm always retreating somewhere. And I've got a group of fellow retreaters. We're all at the point where we're coming to the ends of our first books. And we've managed to maintain several times a week, we meet up and talk about where we are. And to be frank, it's the only thing that's kept me going, apart from Victoria and Nikki helping me along. But I can't tell you how somebody else making you, always saying to you, well, where have you got to? You said you were going to do this. Have you done it? Or shall we have another drink? Because it's not all work. but those things are I think it's really, really important. So find people to help you, because it certainly worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Sherry, I think you're not alone in that, in that had you not had that accountability, you probably wouldn't have done anything. and I think that's, like I say, I think there's been a big divide there with creativity over the last year. I've talked to some people who have been, you know, like kicking out books like crazy because that's all they could think to do. And other people who, you know, like yourself and Sarah, just haven't found that oomph. But like Sherry says, the group that she gets together with, they developed the connections on a retreat and then continued the connections after, so that they do kind of talk to each other, and you know, we're not there, and they keep writing. And I think it's the continuing connections that really help.
And I think now that the lockdown is starting to finish, we've all got that anxiety about going to the big wide world. Lots of us are older. No, not lots. Some of us are a little older and have been very locked down for quite a long while. So it's been quite hard. I still haven't been in a big supermarket. I haven't plucked up enough courage to do it. So I think there's a lot of things that lockdown is responsible for. And if your head isn't in the right place to go into a supermarket, how are you going to manage to write other than to say, "Oh, I'm scared of going in the supermarket. Everybody's going to laugh at me." You know, but it's nice to be able to talk to other people who have the same anxieties.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Sherry, this goes back to what I was saying kind of right at the beginning about why you write and developing the emotions, right? Take that fear, that worry and anxiety about going out, and use it. Put it in your writing. You know, don't let it be just for the sake of being, but put it to use, put it to work. Take that depth of emotion and put it into one of your characters. Give them that fear, because you know what you're feeling. If you can use it and put it in the book, other people will recognize it, just like they'll recognize it if you go to the grocery store, you know, and those of us who aren't, you know, I go out and people are really close and I want to go, why are you so close to me? Like, why do they feel the need? But put that in a book and other readers will feel it because it's genuine and it's authentic. And that's how we create the connections, is using really authentic emotions in our writing and in our characters. So make use of what you're feeling as well.
Thank you. Good advice.
Anyone else? Come on. Oh, quiet group. All right. Well, I'm going to give you one last thing.
I could ask you a fun question.
Oh, yes. Yes, do that.
Go on. Who's the most famous of your connections?
Oh, Nicole Kahn, I think, is probably the most famous of mine. And none of you probably know who she is. So.
I'm just going to say, who?
Yeah. She's an author, but she's primarily a filmmaker, and she's done quite a few films. Elena Undone, and lesbian films, you know, primarily. And then Paul Magger is probably the other, but you know, he's friends with everybody, so that doesn't really it doesn't really count, I don't think. But I will say he oh, see, Nikki knows. Yay, Nikki! I worked on a book of Nicole Kahn's, which was really very, very cool. Not one of her lesbian books, a mainstream thing. So there it is. Paul Magers is a Doctor Who writer, and he came to me at the Manchester Pride stall and told me how much he loved my books. And you know, for a science fiction writer, that was pretty amazing. But I'm afraid those are my only two, really. But I have made a lot of amazing connections. I mean, through the writing studio, I've made some amazing connections. Nikki and I have now known each other since that little place on Stony Street, I think. So that's a long time, Nikki. And, you know, Tom and I have some fantastic oddball conversations. So, you know, I think I've developed so many amazing connections via writing, but I think a lot of it requires action now. It requires more. And in order to develop depth, we have to be active about it and actually send the messages when we're thinking of somebody and not worry about whether that's going to make us seem odd or, you know, to put our writing out there at all is scary, because everybody has an opinion. But it's a great feeling, and it matters. I can't say how much it matters to people, because you never know whose lives you're going to touch. So just keep going and don't stop and reach out. You can always reach out to me via Facebook or Twitter or my email, you know, or via the studios. They can get hold of me. I love hearing from people. I love stories. I love knowing, you know, that how you came to the studio and what brought you to writing and what you've been through. Weird things that you know, can make it into books. My grandmother was married 8 times. 8 times. 2 of them were in Tijuana in Mexico, and she said that they didn't count because they were in Mexico, so she didn't divorce them. Weird. We all have weird stuff like that in our backgrounds. Family is a treasure trove of stuff. But what I've just told you, who knows if that might make it into one of your books at some point, right? One of your characters might have somebody who does that. And this is one of the really special things about connection, is you learn these things and write them down and use them later. People are just a wealth of weirdness. So, you know, make use of it and connect with each other and enjoy the weirdness and dig into it. And if you want to go on the writing retreat, send me an email. What do you say, Tom? Sophie, are we good?
I will actually just jump in and say that as the recipient of some of your messages, they always put such a smile on my face. Always seem to find me at a time where I could really benefit from reading them. So yes, as someone who's experienced it firsthand, do send those messages. They are so appreciated. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And sometimes I send them and Tom doesn't have time to get back, but I think he'll have read it. It's fine. He knows I'm thinking about him.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. If you don't get an immediate response, because sometimes I get so overwhelmed with having to reply to messages that it can take me a couple of days, because we have all made ourselves so incredibly readily available that, you know, I've got to reply now, otherwise they're going to think I'm being rude, or all that anxiety that comes with it. Whereas in actual fact, it's fine. You can just get back to them when you're ready.
Whatever. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
We expect to just have answers like right away.
Yeah.
And the amount of people that kind of, and I do this too, you know, when you respond, you say, sorry for the delay, and it's been like 15 minutes. You think, you know, back before social media, you used to send a letter that would take 3 days to get to somebody.
Precisely.
So yeah, it is true. And I think that's,
you'd have to schedule in phone calls with people, so that you could actually spend the, you know, committed time with them. Whereas now it's like a WhatsApp will just come through immediately, and that's how a conversation starts. Yeah,
absolutely.
Crazy.
You remember like sitting and having to use a phone in one room where you couldn't leave.
Yep, I do, very much so.
Yeah, and winding the cord around your finger.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying that you used to live in a windmill, but it wasn't that long ago.
Right, but it does feel like,
at all.
oh, it feels like a whole era ago. Like it is amazing.
Mhm.
And, you know, like when I die at 104, people are going to say, you know, God, think of all the things she saw. Like, yeah, pre and post Facebook. Was it?
Oh, I really don't want that to ever be a defining part of the era. Like, I'm part of the Facebook era. Oh, what a horrible thought. But thank you so much, Victoria. That's
Absolutely.
It's so wonderful and so enriching to be reminded of the connection. And what I would say is, yeah, reaching out as a writer when it is such a solitary experience. I don't think I've ever had a time where I've regretted it and gone, God, I wish I stayed on my own at my writing desk and didn't talk to that person. I've never had that experience. I've just done the novel in a year course with Jenny Kane. I'm just about to complete that. And that has been the only way that I have ever managed to write a novel to completion. I did it because of other people, because of the support, because of being able to, you know, have those freak out moments to Jenny by email going, I've completely lost faith in what I'm doing. Oh my God, is this rubbish? And she says, okay, put it away for 2 days and then come back. Yeah, just completely invaluable, these connections that we can have as writers. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the matter, but thank you.
Yeah. I think that's so true. Yeah, absolutely.
But that is 7:30. So unless there's any more burning questions that anyone has for Victoria, I will bid you all adieu and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you for coming to connect.
I'm going to write some letters this weekend.
And write some letters.
I'm going to do it. I've been meaning to for ages.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Keep writing.
Bye.
Take care all. Bye.